for this tutorial, you're going to need to take notes in the blue box. So make sure that you have a paper in front of you that has this picture in the box on your paper. One of the things you want to keep in mind is that when you're trying to find the area of parallelograms, triangles, and this extends even onto trapezoids and prisms, that base and height always have to have a special relationship. Sometimes base and height is referred to as length and width in a formula. If it's base and height, they'll use a B and an H. If they're talking about length and width, they'll use an L and a W. But what you have to remember is that those two always have to be perpendicular. Make sure you write this in your notes. Perpendicular means they meet at a right angle. If you need to pause the video in order to get that down in your notes, please do so. They meet at a right angle. So often in pictures, you will see a right angle presented for you. And the reason that it's there is because they're telling you that these things are perpendicular. So a lot of times on this parallelogram you see in example 1, a lot of times students will look at this and they'll say, oh, well, this must be the base and this must be the height. That's incorrect, because the base and the height have to be at a right angle. That is simply the side of the parallelogram. The height of the parallelogram is right here. So when I look for them being perpendicular, you can see the T that's being made with that base and that height. This leads me to the next parallelogram that I'm looking at, where some students might want to say, oh, I bet this is the base because it's at the bottom. But that is not always the case. It does not necessarily sit on its base. What you need to look for is the two things that are perpendicular. This is the height, this is the base. So this might be labeled as, say, 12, and this might be labeled as 8, and you would use those in order to find the area. So you can see up here, you would take 12 times 8, and that would give you 96 as the area. In the example of the triangles, this is also true, and I purposely left the base and height off of these. The thing about a triangle is that all three sides could be the base, but you want to use the one that you have the height to. So the height that is perpendicular. You would have to be told this height, and there would be a right angle here, and then you would use that as a base. Sometimes they'll draw a picture that looks like this. And if that is the case, then you want to treat that as the height, and this as the base. Notice that in all these cases that I'm drawing here, the thing that we know is true is that they're always at a right angle. When you have a right triangle, like you have in this situation, then your base and your height are actually the sides of the right triangle. This last picture of a triangle is the one that's the hardest to comprehend. And you might think of this as kind of a mountain. This would be like the base of your mountain. But since your base, sorry, let me put a B there. Since your base and your height have to be perpendicular, your height is actually out here. So you extend it out, and this would be your height. Let me make that solid then. So those would be your bases and your heights. So for instance, in this picture that's up here, if the base had been 8 and the height had been 3, when I look at this formula, I would take 1/2 times 8 times 3, which would give me 12 square units. Now, in continuing in your notes, what we're going to do, and I'm going to recommend that what I write over here, you write maybe like in this free space that is here, and this free space is here. We're going to work a couple of these examples that are very similar to what you've been experiencing on your skills quiz, question number 5. If they tell you that the area, like they might tell you that the area is something, so let's say in this case they say the area is 8 meters squared, and you have labels like a 12 here, and you have, say, a 10 here, and they say find the base. Now, you don't need to write this part down. But if this is what you're looking for, here's a nice step-by-step process that can help you figure out the best way to answer this question. The first thing they say in step 1 is write the formula. Here, let me highlight so you see where I'm reading. Write the formula needed to set up an equation. And what's nice on the skills quiz, and you see this happen on the ACT as well, they often tell you the formula. So the formula that we need is A is equal to BH. You should write that in your notes. The next thing they say is to identify the values for each variable in the formula you know and which variables you're solving for. Well, so when I look at this formula that's A equals BH, I know the A value. They told me that down here. They told me the A is 80. I also know the H value, and I hope you guys recognize what the H value is, because from what we just talked about, the height and the base have to be perpendicular to each other. So that means that this is the height and this is the base. So the height is 10, and the thing that I'm looking for is the base. They told us down here, find the base. The 12 was just extra information to try to trick you into thinking that was the height. Now step number 3 says, let me hit my highlighter out again. Step number 3 says set up an equation from step 1 by replacing variables with the values in step 2. So at step 1 it says to start with A, and my A is basically my 80. I see that in step 2. Is equal to B, which is what I'm looking for, and H is 10. And since we're multiplying, I'll just put it like this. The next thing they want us to do is to solve the equation using inverse operations. Now I can write this as 10B. It's the same thing. I divide both sides by 10, so my B is 8. And it says answer the question. The question was to find the base, so the base must be 8 meters. I hope you had a chance to write that down, at least what I have in blue, as a way to have some notes to take a look at. Now we're going to take a look at another example that's still in that notes section of the triangle. So if you can find that picture of the triangle that looks like this, let me back up and make sure. Oh yeah, I think our triangle looks like this. I believe we had a line in here. So sometimes what they'll do on a quiz or test is they might give you lots of numbers. Like they might tell you that this is 6, and that maybe this is 6.2, and that maybe this is 7.1, and they'll tell you the area is, I don't know, 53 inches squared. Find the base. You don't need to write the problem down, but hopefully you labeled the picture. And then they say write the formula that's needed to set up an equation. And the formula is given to us up here in the example. It tells us A is equal to 1/2 BH. Then they tell us to identify the values for each variable that in the formula that you know and which ones you're solving for. Well, I know my area is 53. I don't know my base, and I know my height. I got to figure out which one is my height. Remember, base and height need to be perpendicular. There's my height, there's my base. So my height is 6, and my base I don't know. Next thing is to take my equation from step 1 and stick the values in from step 2. So my A is a 53. I have my 1/2. I have my B, and then my H is 6. I could simplify this even further by taking 1/2 of 6, which is 3, and make that 3B. Then I would just divide both sides by 3, and B would be 17.6 repeating. So the answer to the question, my base is 17.6 inches. What I'd like you to do next is at the bottom of your paper, you'll see a bunch of triangles and parallelograms. I'd like you to get in the habit of identifying the base and the height. So you're going to draw 2 lines on each picture to represent base and height, and remember that they're perpendicular to each other. Once you get finished with that, on the back of your page, there are 3 problems similar to what you're looking at on the screen now that I'd like you to work and check with your tutor to make sure you're doing them correctly.